President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived in Germany for the G7 Leaders Summit that kicks off tomorrow. The summit takes place in Bavaria, Germany, and has indicated that it will seek to strengthen the G7's responsibility for working towards the global common good and expanding cooperation with all parties, especially within the framework of the United Nations. eNCA's correspondent Ali Barrett joins us now live for more on this. Ali, perhaps just speak to us about the arrival of President Cyril Ramaphosa and perhaps the agenda of the G7 Leaders Summit this year.
Yeah, he arrived earlier today, and this evening he'll be taking part in a dinner that's being hosted by the Bavarian leader locally here, which will be attended by the other leaders that are in attendance at the G7 summit. The G7 summit itself is actually already underway, and at the end of the first day of proceedings, we've just had what the leaders consider to be one of the big set-piece announcements. Joe Biden, the US president, leading the announcement of what's called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which he says will raise $600 billion for spending by 2027 on infrastructure projects, including clean energy and technology, particularly in developing economies. Of course, also on the agenda today has been Ukraine. There have been discussions about foreign policy, about the global economy, about the cost of living crisis as well. And then tomorrow, Cyril Ramaphosa will join proceedings. He'll take part in a couple of meetings with global leaders, along with the leaders also of India, Indonesia, Senegal and Argentina, who, along with South Africa, have been invited by Germany, the hosts of G7 this year, because they are large, significant democratic nations, and Germany and the other G7 leaders want to show that the large democracies of the world can come together and agree a unified position on a number of topics.
Certainly, and I think nobody really expected that this time around with the G7 summit, the conversation would be about or possibly be focusing on the massive issue between Russia and Ukraine. Last year it was about recovery of COVID-19, and this year it's a completely different aspect that's affecting a number of countries across the globe. I'm sure this is going to be top of the agenda, Ali, with many countries being questioned about their stance with this, and possibly Ukraine having a say in all of this.
Absolutely, and it really is dominating proceedings here, and I'm sure it will do again tomorrow. And the G7 are absolutely desperate to show a unified position when it comes to Ukraine and when it comes to their stance against Russia. Now that, I think, has been strengthened, that resolve, because of those overnight strikes that we saw on Kiev, which are being interpreted here as a direct attempt by Vladimir Putin to send a message that he is not finished yet when it comes to Ukraine, that he's still able to carry out damaging strikes on the capital, Kiev. And so there is, as I say, a real willing to show unity here, but that is going to be difficult for a number of reasons. One is that there are divisions between G7 countries about exactly what to do next. There is a suspicion in London and Washington, for example, that perhaps Germany and France would like to persuade Ukraine to try and accept a peace deal in the near future that would see them giving up swathes of the country. London and Washington think that would be the wrong thing to do. But also, with South Africa and Senegal in attendance, we know that a number of leaders have been very critical of Western sanctions, which they say have been harming the African economy and the African economy's ability to get its hands on, for example, grain and food supply. They see spiking energy costs as well, and they blame that, many leaders, on Western sanctions too. Now, the G7 would say that's not their fault. This is the fault directly of Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine in an unprovoked way with this, what they see as illegal invasion. But all of that together does make it hard to come up with a unified position on Ukraine and on Russia, although it has to be said that earlier in the day here, the G7 leaders did agree that they'd be slapping new sanctions on Russia in the form of a ban on the import of gold. And that was a sanctions round led by the UK, the US, Canada and Japan. But it'll be very interesting to see not just the public statements that come out over the next 24 hours or so, but if we can get a sense from diplomats and officials behind the scenes about whether some of these conversations have been particularly difficult.
Certainly, we'll definitely be keeping track with that story. Thank you so much for that comprehensive update. That was eNCA correspondent Ollie Barrett.